So, yes, I'm going to tell you today about parenting in poison frogs. And what I'm going to tell you about are a few pieces of a very large project. And so I want to start by acknowledging that I would not be here without the help of a number of other people, most notably my advisor, Lauren, the other postdoc in my lab, Alex, our collaborators who have helped us collect samples, and of course, our funding sources. So parental care, different parental care strategies have evolved repeatedly and independently across all sorts of animal taxa, and they have important consequences. As we just saw in a lovely talk, they change survival and fitness of offspring. They also change the types of habitats that animals can take advantage of, and from a broader perspective, parental care is thought to be an evolutionary precursor to social behaviors more generally. And so for a long time we've known these things, and we know about various costs and trade-offs of exhibiting these types of behaviors, but what we don't know a lot about is the underlying mechanisms that maintain these behaviors within species and also give rise to these behaviors across species. So in our lab, we're interested in understanding the mechanisms, the underlying mechanisms that give rise to these behaviors and their evolution. And to do this, as you've probably guessed by now, we take advantage of closely related species of poison frogs, primarily in the family Amphibians. So you likely can immediately appreciate that these animals are beautiful and charismatic. You've probably heard, as the name implies, that they are poisonous. There's talk next door as we speak about their toxins. But what you may not know is that closely related species have different parental care strategies. And so what's nice about the system is that we see male uniparental care, female uniparental care, and biparental care in closely related species. And that lets us really take advantage of the system to tease apart what's important for parental care per se versus what's important in a sex or species-specific way. So what does parental care look like if you are a poison frog? We tend to talk about three distinct phases. The first is egg care, so these animals defend their eggs, they clean and hydrate them. Once these eggs hatch, parents transport their tadpoles piggyback style to pools of water where they stay until they hatch. So here is the tadpole on this parent's back. And then in some but not all species, the mothers return over the course of months, in some cases, to feed unfertilized eggs to their growing tadpoles. So what's nice about this system then as well is that these different species exhibit similar behaviors, so we can compare these behaviors. But what differs is which sex is performing these behaviors in different care strategies, and so then obviously this feeding behavior is not possible for males because the females feed unfertilized eggs, the males don't make eggs. So I'm not going to talk about this feeding behavior today. We have projects that I'm really excited about, so if you're interested, please come find me. I just got back from a bunch of field work looking at that, but for today I'm going to focus on these three, or these two behaviors really, and then our control group in which animals are not caring for offspring. In the lab, one note about the experimental design, we house these guys in pairs. So we've always got a male and a female together. We provide them with the substrates they need to reproduce, including pools of water to put their tadpoles in. And what's important is that when we collect animals, we collect them in pairs as well. So in this example, this dad is transporting, but we also collect his mate. And so I'll refer back to that. And we do this because we want to, again, be able to really compare across sexes and species what's happening in parenting versus non-parenting offspring, but also what about in this case where dad is parenting but mom is around and related to this tadpole. So this is this beautiful diagram that sort of encompasses our research that Lauren made, and so what we're really trying to do is understand these things also across a number of levels of biological organization. I'm going to talk today about behavior and hormones, and a little bit about neural mechanisms. I'm not going to talk about our molecular mechanisms work, in which we're also looking at gene expression in the brain, but again, if you are interested, please come find me. So I'll start by talking a little bit about hormones and behavior. So I'm going to begin by talking about differences in testosterone in males only. To orient you, I will display these data in the same way. So here's the species name, here's its care strategy, and these little diagrams are sort of telling you who, these symbols show you which parent is performing these behaviors. So in this male uniparental species, it's the male that performs these behaviors. So what do we see? So we look at testosterone in Dendrobates tinctorius, and we see a decrease in testosterone when dads are transporting. If we compare that to Oophaga familio, we don't see any differences in testosterone in the males, but these males are not parental. So this is a female uniparental species, and nothing seems to change even when mom is transporting their offspring or caring for their offspring. And then finally, in our biparental species, we also do not see a difference in testosterone levels across stages. So if we take these together, there's two things that I want to point out. One is that, pointer is a little finicky. One is that the testosterone levels in our female uniparental species are much higher. So it seems like, so these axes are on different scales. It seems like parenting in fathers decreases testosterone, but in a male uniparental species, we see a difference across different behaviors, whereas in the biparental species, we don't. And so I think what that suggests is that perhaps if you are also pair bonding, because you are biparental, that also changes these patterns. And so we'll come back to that in a moment. But first, I'm now going to tell you about cortisol in males and females. So as you probably know, cortisol is important for all sorts of things, but it classically gets termed a stress hormone. We'll just roll with that for now and ignore some of the finer details. So now I'm going to show you this data in the same way, except that now I have males in the lighter colors and females in the darker colors. And again, these represent pairs of animals who, pairs of animals. And so what we see in our male uniparental species is that there is no difference in females across behaviors, but there is an increase in cortisol in transporting fathers. Conversely, we also see an increase in cortisol in the transporting parent in the female uniparental species. The difference is that in this case, the female is the transporter, and she's the one showing an increase. There's no change in the males. And then finally, in our biparental species, there is an increase here, again, in males. They're the ones that transport, so the females are around. They will later egg feed, they help with egg care, but they are not typically the transporters. So there is an increase there. It's not significant because something sort of funky is going on with our no-care group over here, and I just ran these hormone plates last Friday, so I'm still puzzling a little bit over what might be going on there. But I think that if we compare across groups, we have evidence that there is a trend for increased cortisol during transport in these animals across species and care strategies. So we're excited about these results because they jive pretty well with what is out there in the literature, which is first of all that testosterone decreases in fathers across a range of species, and that cortisol increases during parental effort in a lot of species. Being a parent, as probably many of you know, can be sort of a stressful event. But I think what is cool about the frogs and what they contribute to this story is that they demonstrate that to understand these patterns, you also have to think about what the specific care strategy of these different species are, because that is an important interaction that's happening with sex as well. So now the second thing I'm going to tell you about is neural mechanisms in these same groups of animals. And so I'm guessing most of you don't spend a lot of time thinking about the brain like I do. I don't have time to explain these methods in detail, so you're just going to have to take my word for it. I can get the brain out of a frog. We then can section those brains and look at different regions. So I don't need you to know anything about these abbreviations other than that these blobs represent different brain regions and that we know things about the functions of these regions, and so And we can then look at neural activation in these different regions. So this is a picture that shows you a cross-section of a frog brain through the head this direction. And what we can do is look at neural activation and ask about differences. And so here again, in our male uniparental species, the regions highlighted in blue show differences in activation when frogs are non-parental versus transporting. And then again, as before with the hormones, we can compare across species as well. I am still in the middle of collecting these data for our third biparental species, so this is somewhat preliminary, but what I think you can see without worrying about any of the details is that there are some regions that are unique to the species and possibly sex, so we need our third biparental species to disentangle that better. And there are some regions that are shared. I'm going to zoom in on this shared region, the POA, the preoptic area. And here, as with hormones, we see this interesting pattern where there's an increase in neural activation in the transporting parent. The difference being here, that means the males have increased neural activation in the preoptic area, and here, the females have increased activation. So independent of sex and species and care strategy, we see this pattern. So to summarize then, we find evidence for shared mechanisms mediating parental care across species with distinct care strategies, but sex and care strategy specific mechanisms also exist. And again, what's really nice is that because we have this really beautiful comparative system, we can actually tease these things apart. And so the ongoing work in our lab right now is to fill out this data set. So I'm finishing the neural activation for the biparental species, and we also have a bunch of gene expression studies that we're doing again in these same species so that we can then ultimately integrate also across these levels of biological organization to understand the mechanisms underlying these really wonderful behaviors. Thank you.